Let's continue with the focus on Zimbabwe. Young people touted as kingmakers ahead of the Zimbabwe presidential election, but did they show up as expected? Let's cross now to Newzroom Afrika's Ziniko Mhlaba, who is in Hillbrow this hour. And Ziniko, good morning to you. What have you heard on the streets from the people of Zimbabwe, particularly young people who are in the streets of South Africa?
Well, clearly, as far as the voices of young people we've managed to speak to off camera, especially when we were in the morning at Bedford View at the Zimbabwe consulate, a lot of young people actually just didn't sound as if they cared much, because they believe that they seem as if they've lost hope. But with some gentlemen who had said, actually guys, it's done and dusted, there's nothing we can do while here in South Africa to make a living or trying to make the best of what we have here in South Africa. So as far as politics are concerned, we don't have much interest in that. So that's the attitude we are getting from young people. But I'm joined now by another young person who is a South African but deals a lot with researching developments that are happening here in South Africa, especially when it comes to issues of peace and stability, and that also talks to the issues of elections, and that's Lwazi Somya, who's from the Southern African Liaison Office. My brother, you've been monitoring these elections very well, Mr. Somya, and from what you've picked up, especially the SADC decision of you on fairness and the fairness of the Zimbabwe elections, and how has that been unfolding with the latest results coming from the commission? They're saying actually the results were quite fair, and also declaring ZANU-PF, Mr. Mnangagwa, as the winner of those elections, who stands now as the president-elect. So what have you observed so far?
So Zimbabwe is a treaty member of SADC. They have signed the SADC treaty. On top of the SADC treaty, Zimbabwe itself is a signatory to something called the Protocol on Security, Defense and Cooperation. Now, under that protocol, there's something called the SADC Guidelines and Principles towards democratic elections, to which all governments within Southern Africa are signatory to. What the SADC mission, along with the African Union mission to Zimbabwe, have highlighted is that these elections fell short of not only Zimbabwe's constitution, but also the election guidelines presented by the regional organization plus the continental organization. We have heard some slapback from ZANU-PF spokesperson Christian Mubutanga, along with some members of the ruling party in South Africa, concerning whether the comments made by the SADC mission were fit enough. But we must remind them, in previous missions, such as the mission in Botswana's elections, the mission in Mozambique's elections, the mission in Lesotho's elections, the SADC missions have always commented around legislation and constitutional arrangements that are conducive of the environment for free and fair elections. In this instance, they highlighted legislation such as the Patriotic Bill as hindering the environment for free and fair elections. Issues around voter intimidation from ZAF forces, which are they intimidate around 34,000 villages within Zimbabwe. Issues around ballot papers and voters' rolls within Zimbabwe and the unavailability. Issues around the high price of access towards the elections, all created an environment that was not free and fair and conducive towards free and democratic elections in Zimbabwe.
Just lastly, my brother, one last question. We heard and we saw a social media post by Fikile Mbalula, the Secretary General of the ruling party here in South Africa, the ANC, that has very close ties with ZANU-PF in Zimbabwe from the political historic moments. But also, should these results be contested going forward officially by the African Union and SADC, and maybe in future there is a need for South Africa to intervene, how will these comments, dilute that responsibility of South Africa? Should it be asked to intervene and assist in terms of resolving those issues?
First and foremost, whenever there's been change within Zimbabwe, South Africa has had a proactive role. We should remember that in 2008, when violence broke out following those elections, President Thabo Mbeki, along with the South African delegation, went into Zimbabwe along with the SADC grouping, and out came the global political agreement, which created a government of national unity. And back in 2018 and 2017, when there was a coup d'etat, Qatar, engagements with South Africa was very, very important. Even in 2018, following the violence, the Zimbabwean government commissioned something called the Mutlanta Commission, which established the facts and basis towards how free and fair elections are to be carried out in the future. However, what we see currently from the Secretary General of the ANC is high political immaturity in terms of how we deal with it and how it has traditionally been dealt with. Instead of reaffirming SADC's role within the region in terms of democratic elections, the Secretary General of the ANC essentially pitted the ANC against the regional body and against the AU without any evidence basis for his assertions. And secondly, whilst Zimbabwe is going through this quagmire and an elections deficit, the ANC has historically played a very critical role, and Secretary General of the ANC has basically tied the hands of President Ramaphosa in any potential intervention strategies that might bear fruit in the future.
Thank you very much, Mr. President.
No problem. Thank you
very much for your time, Mr. Somya, giving us very insights about the possibilities, some political comments which have been made by political parties here in South Africa can actually dilute the situation or the condition in which any possible intervention in South Africa will be asked to do in future. So that's the situation here at Hillbrook, just outside the Johannesburg CBD.